It is my pleasure to introduce you to Antonio Giordano de Sicilia from the West, and who is teaching a class on La Cantigas de Santa Maria.
That's correct. We're going to wish everyone a good day or a good evening, depending upon where you're from. These cantigas were effectively compiled by King Alfonso X. He's referred to as El Sabio, the Wise, King of Castile and Leon, King of Toledo, King of just about everything. And one of the most important things about this particular king is he didn't win any great battles. He didn't complete the Reconquista. Rather, he did two things. He created a book of laws where he had so many divergent portions of his kingdom with different laws. He created a set of laws in 7 parts, las siete partidas. But he also created what have been referred to as La Cantigas de Santa Maria. They were composed at the court of this king, El Sabio, the Wise. Obviously, no one would have said El Sabio, the guy with the big nose, or anything like that. Whenever you have a king, obviously he has a PR department, and he wanted to push the fact that he was wise, not unlike Solomon in terms of the ancient Hebrew people. He's king of Castile and Leon, second half of the 13th century. Now, the interesting thing about these is that they're not actually written in Castilian. They are huge, encyclopedic repertory of poetry set to music in medieval Galician. We'll get into the reason why Castilian was not used in this particular case. There are 420 compositions, 353 narratives of miracles, and as we get through this, we're going to realize that there's a great deal of paternoster-like activity. There are patterns. They break at times, but for the most part, these are formulaic in terms of the way they're laid out. These cantigas are much more than a body of literature or miracle collection. They're much more of a cultural project of great importance. When we're thinking about the reason why he wrote these, we can come up with several reasons, one of which is he wanted to show everybody that he was pious. The second thing is that he wanted to show everybody that he was in fact guided by the hand of God, and that he took the mother of the Savior, the Blessed Virgin Mary, as his patroness. He wanted to show that his patroness, the Blessed Virgin Mary, was in fact the champion of the Reconquista. But more important than all of these is the fact that he was truly trying to define a Catholic nature of a vast kingdom that was not really a single realm. It was not Spain. They were pieces of Spain. And this individual realized that by putting together a certain amount of historical patronage, he was able to start crafting the very nature of this realm. Cantigas, as indicated, are written in Galician-Portuguese. It was a very fashionable lyrical language. They are not in Castilian. Rather, he bowed to the idea that Galician-Portuguese was, in fact, the language of poets. A great example would be, you look at the fact that Sicilian was the first dialect of Italy, and yet what actually took over? Tuscan. Why? Because of the great poets, specifically Dante Alighieri. You were looking at these portraits of faith, quote unquote, and the identification of a very Catholic Spanish realm at a point in time when the Reconquista was not completed. There are 420 cantigas. These are poems or lyrics with 356 being narrative formats relating to Marian miracles, that is, miracles of the Blessed Virgin Mary. We're going to get into some of them. Some of them are kind of humorous. Some of them are kind of odd, but we will get into them. The balance of the cantigas, except for an introduction and two prologues, involve Marian festivals or festivities or folktales. The cantigas depict the Virgin Mary in a human yet exalted manner. Remember that in terms of the Catholic Church, and the king was in fact a Catholic king. And so he took as his patroness the most exalted saint, saints being canonized by the Roman Catholic Church. And as such, this particular saint was not just a saint like Santiago of Compostela fame. She was in fact the vessel that brought forth the Redeemer of the world. And in terms of this, she's often playing a role in earthly episodes after her assumption in heaven. And each one of these is a lesson. Each one of these is effectively bringing to mind in the varied minds of the peoples that he is ruling over, the fact that there is a unique and unification of their faith, bring divergent people together, with the exception of course, Muslims and Jews. Now, the authors could be very many. Some have been noted. Alfonso may have, in fact, written some of them. It's not really clear exactly who wrote all of them. They're effectively a collection. It would be as if someone who was a king wanted to put forward something. His authorship is, as indicated, debatable. His influence, though, is not. To be clear, the Cantigas de Santa Maria were his pet project, and they were one of two instances where he definitely pushed forward his realm. The first one being Las Siete Partidas, a very common book of 7 laws for each pattern in life, whether you were a soldier, a knight, whether you were a ruler, whether you were anything. Las Siete Partidas went ahead and instructed you how you should act. However, in these Cantigas de Santa Maria, the royal we is clearly utilized. It's something that he often pushed, and it was something that he was quite proud of. Perhaps it's best to conclude that apart from some of the lyric poems, Alfonso initiated the process, oversaw the process, and probably was the final editor. He may not have been the great author. A lot of people like to look at Henry VIII and they speculate as to what songs did he actually write? What poems did he actually write? The fact is, Henry had at his disposal a number of people to write poetry and to write music for him. Likewise, so did Alfonso. And Alfonso effectively created this kind of workshop, kind of a pre-Renaissance workshop where everything got put together, and then ultimately he was not only the architect, but the final editor. The cult of the Blessed Virgin is well established in Christendom. To Catholic Christians, Mary was conceived by the Holy Spirit without original sin. As such, she was seen as God's chosen vessel for the Christ. As a Virgin Mother, she was seen as an intercessor, protector, and nurturer. In a church that was dominated by men, and a church that was terribly misogynistic, it's interesting that she was the female face of the divine, both human and the primary saint in the canon of saints. She was without sin, queen of heaven, and such, someone who could be considered approachable. This narrative voice basically describes the relationship between the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ, and the fact that she, in fact, inserts herself into situations where people maybe need help. where people sometimes go astray, where something as simple as your silkworms die, and the person basically promises the Virgin, if only my silkworms survive, I would want to provide your statue with the most beautiful silken veil. So, for us, it may look like, oh, this is, cracked pottery. However, to them, this was very real. They truly took their faith seriously, and to be someone who mocked the faith was to put yourself in great harm's way. There's another aspect to this. Look at it from the standpoint of troubadour poetry in Provençal. There's a relationship between an individual and a woman of great standing that is personal. The troubadour is not just an itinerant jungler or a minstrel. A troubadour typically was someone stately, someone who was a courtier, but they wrote their poetry for a greater woman, someone of a greater station. In this particular case, look at the Cantigas de Santa Maria as King Alfonso, acting in kind of a religious and political way, making himself basically the servant, like the troubadour is, of a greater woman. He's the servant of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And furthermore, this link between him and the Blessed Virgin Mary and the church during his reign would help him and exhort those around him to retake Spain from the Muslim wars, the Reconquista. The Heavenly Queen was viewed as the great mediatrix, the merciful mother to whom all could call upon. This is an individual who, when someone might not lift their eyes to heaven, to quote unquote God, they can go to a human being, to a mother figure. I always like to joke that there's, in heaven, there was a situation where Jesus came to St. Peter, yelling at him, saying, I saw some people necking over there in the corner of heaven, and I saw other people gambling, and there were men over there fighting. Aren't you doing a good job, Peter? And Peter looks at him and says, my Lord, it's your mother who's letting him in the back door. In short, the mother is seen as the one who would bring about mediation where there could be no mediation with God because of man's imperfections. He obviously identified with the idea that miracles occurred. And we as modern human beings, we have science, we have reason, we have logic. But in a lot of cases, and there are a lot of beautiful stories where miracles are occurring and people subscribe those quote unquote miraculous events to some superpower, such as the Blessed Virgin Mary, Santa Maria. I was in a cathedral in Spain, can't remember, it's John the Builder, can't think of that particular cathedral. Anyway, there's this situation where a young pilgrim is basically, he's set up by a woman who basically wants to have sex with him. He's a young, beautiful young man with his mother and father going to Compostela. And she ends up slipping into his baggage a silver cup. And of course, he's caught as a thief. He's hung. His parents are so terribly taken by this, yet they continue on to Santiago. And when they come back through the same particular town, what do they find? They find him alive. So they go to the alderman, the mayor, and they say, our son is still alive. May we cut him down and take him home with us? And the reality of it is, the mayor basically says, your son is as dead as these two chickens on my table. And at that point in time, according to the story, the two tables basically pop up and start, jumping around the table. Once again, it really goes against our very modern worldview. But in reality, the way people saw fairness being brought about in a life of unfairness was by seeking a mediator, by seeking help from the Virgin Mary. Alfonso was also invoking the aid of St. Mary as protector of Spain, Castile, Leon, Sevilla, Toledo, et al. He basically had all these little pieces. It was not the realm of Spain. It was a bunch of pieces. And one of the unifying factors was a common book of law, La Siete Partidas, but it was also their faith. And in this particular case, Mary was not only was performing her role as a dispenser of divine mercy, but she was also champion of the Reconquista. Alfonso was relying upon folk tales and folk music to help imprint an identity on his Christian Catholic kingdom. She was not only the source of miracles and the manifestations of God's presence in the world, St. Mary was the ardent supporter and protector of Alfonso's political aims. That is, a unification of the Spanish realm. With the legal tome La Siete Partidas, the law in 7 parts, Alfonso's Cantigas occupied most of his reign, with him overseeing both of these great projects, 1252 to 1284, for those who like dates. Alfonso devoted considerable resources to his works. He must add a huge scriptorium. These are lovely. There are actually 4 copies that continue to survive. We'll talk about that. When viewing both the Cantigas de Santa Maria and La Siete Partidas, the concept of the encyclopedic efforts cannot be understated. This is a man who, when he went to create law, put everything into it. No exceptions, no loopholes. When it came to the Cantigas de Santa Maria, it could not be questioned that he was pious, because his piety shone through. I would also say his great sense of being politic also showed through, because of the fact, by drawing on the individual stories, things that people would have known, things that are common. It's like coming together at Thanksgiving or Christmas. You know, you start telling stories about the family. A very unamusing story I always like to bring up is the fact that I have 3 children, and at the time, these 3 little monsters were not exactly all well behaved, except for my daughter. She'll tell you how perfect she was. But John, the youngest, he was eating a big Italian olive, and all of a sudden the pit fell out of his mouth and onto the floor. And I said, John, you're gonna ruin Thanksgiving. How is he going to ruin Thanksgiving with an olive pit? Well, one of the dogs is going to eat it. We're going to end up having to take it to the veterinary hospital. In reality, if you look at this as a story about a family, the family of these Spanish people, these various Spanish realms that have come together, you're talking about a story that is something, and something's going on my screen. Sorry about that. It's getting to my attention. The fact is that if he starts hitting these stories that everybody knows, everybody's going to nod their head and go, oh, yeah, I remember that story. Oh, El Sabio. Yes, of course. All these stories are going to sound familiar, because in reality, what is really truly identifiable as new? You know, those points in time, those great creations really don't come along that often, and things are oftentimes reworked. And so these wonderful little stories made the people kind of follow along. They were kind of the seeds put before pigeons, and it's like, yes, draw along with me. And you could imagine that these cantigas basically took the simple people of Spain and made them feel like they were, oh, yes, those are our stories. The term cantiga simply means a Galician-Portuguese medieval monophonic song or lyric. Monophonic means that it's not polyphony. The Cantigas de Santa Maria are Spanish. However, Alfonso determined that they should be written in Galician-Portuguese according to the style of the Portuguese Galician troubadours. It's important to remember that the cantigas were written to be sung, not just read, but sung. He also made sure that a number of them had beautiful illustrations. There are 2 copies still around that show great illustrations. Some 306 Santiago's, that's wrong, 306 Cantigas de Santa Maria were written in the virelay form. The cantigas as a lyric poetic movement would be referred to as the trovadorismo in Portugal, or the trovadorismo in Galician, and it's the same vein as troubadours of Provence, or the trouverites, the female troubadours of Provence, the trouvères of northern France, and the trovatori of Italy. In the Middle Ages, the Galician-Portuguese lyric poetry was called trovadorismo in Portugal and trovadorismo in Galicia. I put that down twice. It must be important. There are around 1,680 texts in secular lyrics: Cantigas de Amigo, Cantigas de Amor, Cantigas de Escarnio, and Cantigas de Maldizer. And then the religious lyrics of the Cantigas de Santa Maria. Each sets of these lyrics were different and provided different entertainment in different ways. Galician-Portuguese was the language used in nearly all of Iberia for lyric poetry or troubadour songs. Cantigas, once again, like cantos in Italian. The movement was influenced, obviously, by the Occitan troubadours. This is documented at the end of the 12th century and lasted until the middle of the 14th, with the zenith coming in the middle of the 13th century, which effectively centered in Alfonso X's reign. It is the earliest known poetic movement in Galicia, a region in eastern Spain and Portugal. It represents not only the beginning, but one of the high points of poetic history in both countries in the Middle Ages, both countries being what we now know as Portugal and what we now know as Spain. And so where did this come from? It came from the troubadours and trouverites of Provence. Alfonso's use of the troubadour tongue for the writing of sacred songs was a unique phenomenon for a Castilian king, since Galician-Portuguese was the language poets typically employed for love poetry. Cantigas de Amigo, Cantigas de Amor. Cantigas de Amigo, just shortly, those are in a woman's voice. We don't really know if they were written by women, but they're written in a woman's voice. We'll get into that a little more. Cantigas de Amor were men's love songs to women. And you've got the poetic satire of Cantigas de Escarnio and Cantigas de Maldizer. It's interesting that in Mediterranean countries, especially in southern Italy, Sicily, and in Galicia and Portugal, there is this situation where people kind of go at each other. Men kind of taunting women, women taunting men, back and forth. And it's funny because of the fact you say, well, why is that funny? Why is that interesting? Why do we give a darn about that? Well, look at the modern soap opera. I got to be honest with you. After I'd studied for the bar and I was just killing time waiting for results, I started watching a soap opera. It wasn't very interesting, but the way people went at each other was kind of funny. It was kind of interesting. I've got a friend who's Japanese, and he's very much into, and he's like 15 years older than me. He actually likes watching, get this, Korean soap operas. And they're very dramatic, he said. He was basically saying that they're kind of Shakespeare-esque. And it's funny because of the fact when people are going back and forth at each other, it's interesting. And so these kind of poetic satires are something that probably amused the common person. The metrics are extraordinarily diverse. That's easy for me to say. 280 formats are present in some 420 cantigas. The most common are the virelai and the rondo. We'll get into exactly what the two of those are, but just think the length of the lines varies from 2 to 24 syllables. It's fairly loose. However, there is a format, and the format is maintained. The music is written in notation, which is similar to that used for plain chant, but also contains some information about the length of the notes. Now, the virelai is one of the two principal fixed forms of lyric poetry in terms of the Cantigas de Santa Maria. Despite rising in popularity in France in the Middle Ages, it probably didn't originate in France. The virelai effectively came probably from Spain, and in a lot of ways may have come from Arabic, could have come from the Italian. It's like when you're scattering seeds to the wind, who knows exactly where? And so you'll find virelais from everything from the English carols to the Arabic zajal and the Italian halata. The standard virelai form has 3 stanzas, each preceded and followed by a refrain. Each stanza is in 3 sections, the first 2 having the same rhyme scheme, the last having the rhyme scheme of the refrain. The musical setting, the 3rd section of each stanza, therefore, takes the same music as the refrain, while the first 2 sections have different music. You're basically talking about a lot of repeating lines or refrains, such as they refer to them as retraitement, or these refrains, and 2 rhymes throughout. The form was originally a musical vehicle devoted to emotional subjects such as spiritual worship, courtship, romance, the passings of the season, things like that. While there's melancholy sometimes in rondos or rounds, it always ends up that the pain and loss turns to a cheerful c'est la vie in the final stanza. Rondo's form is composed of 15 lines with 8 to 10 syllables, each divided in stanzas into a quintet, a quatrain, and a sestet. So you've got, the 5 lines, the 4 lines, and the 6 lines. And yet, if you look at the actual, what we might see as what's extant examples, we're really not able to see that so much unless you're very, very conversant in the actual language of Galicia and Galician-Portuguese. The refrain consists of the first few words or the entire first line of the first stanza, and it recurs over and over, both the second and the third stanzas. 2 rhymes guide the music of the rondo, whose scheme is as follows: R representing the refrain, A, B, B, A. So rhymes with A, rhymes with A, rhymes with B, rhymes with B, rhymes with A. Then the next rhymes with A, rhymes with A, rhymes with B, refrain, A rhyme, B rhyme, A rhyme, refrain. Is there rhyme or reason to this? No, but this is in fact what was set out and what was popularized. And as a scheme, a rhyming scheme, this was what was followed. The challenge of writing a rondo is finding an opening line worth repeating over and over again, and choosing 2 rhyme sounds that offer sufficient word choices. And the interesting thing is, when you're looking at one of the Romance languages, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, there are so many vowels that words end in. Talk about English, I kind of think Petrarch had it easy compared to the Earl of Surrey in England and Sir Thomas Wyatt, because in fact the English language doesn't work that way. And so when Shakespeare is writing his sonnets, he's really accomplishing something because of the fact that, unlike the Romance languages, a lot of English words don't end in vowels. As opposed to the other cantigas, de amigo, de amor, de escarno, de maldecir, the verses in the Cantigas de Santa Maria appear to be more numerous, 5 strophes as opposed to 3 or 4 and longer, the most common line being 14 syllables as opposed to 8 to 10 syllables. The reason for this is it gives you more storytelling space. It's like having a dance floor. The bigger the dance floor, the more dancers. The more syllables, the more information you can pass. The Cantigas de Santa Maria usually begins with two lines, a refrain or a raison. The most common form is that of the Zahel of Arabic and Jewish origin. Once again, just remember, Spain was inculcated with both the minds of Arabic individuals and cultures, Jewish individuals and cultures, and the Christian individuals and cultures. And it's not always them working nicely together, as some would say, it was a paradise. Sometimes it was a hot mess, depending upon who had the most zeal that particular decade. This should not be surprising in view of the multicultural nature of the Iberian Peninsula under Arabic rule until 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella gave Jews and Arabs the choice to convert or be banished. That's about it for that. The earliest extant composition in this school is usually agreed to be Ora faz ost, o seno de Navarra, by Juan Suarez de Paiva. Yeah, I don't do very well with Portuguese. Better with Spanish. Usually dated just before or after 1200. Traditionally, the end of the period of active trovadorismo is given as 1350, the date of the testament of Don Pedro, Count of Barcelona, the natural son of King Dinis of Portugal, who left a Livro de Cantigas, a songbook, to his nephew Alfonso XI of Castile. And one of the things that people sometimes go and say is, well, why did Portugal and why didn't Spain just absorb Portugal? The answer is there was such intermarriage that you don't want to go invade, your brother-in-law. And the interesting thing is, normally, if you look at northern Italy, especially during the Renaissance, you have bloodthirsty wars all over the place. And then as time goes on, it becomes then, the French, the Spanish, the Germans basically picking the bones of northern Italy. And yet here you have Portugal, not exactly the strongest country, Spain, probably the strongest country in the later Middle Ages. And the two of them have this natural kinship. They have their languages and they have their relationships. The troubadours of this movement, not to be confused with the Occitan troubadours who frequented courts in nearby Leon and Castile, wrote several kinds of cantigas with monophonic melodies. However, only 14 melodies have survived. Their poetry was meant to be sung, but they emphatically distinguished themselves from jongleurs or itinerant minstrels. These were, in fact, courtly, stately individuals who were writing for the court, who in principle sang, but they did in fact compose. These jongleurs, these minstrels, they sang, but they did not compose. In fact, they probably stole most of their stories and their songs. Beginning around the 13th century, the songs known as cantares or cantigas or trovas began to be compiled in collections known as cancioneros or songbooks. Three such anthologies are noted by scholars: the Da Ahuda, the Coloci Brancuti, and the Canciano, the Songbook of the Vatican. We'll just go with that. It's been a long day. Four forms of or genres of Galician-Portuguese cantigas predated the Cantigas de Santa Maria, the religious lyrics extolling the virtues of the Virgin Mary. The male-voiced love poetry called the Cantigas de Amor. The origins are basically traced to Provençal and the old French lyric poetry of the troubadours, and in northern France, the trouvères. And but they're formally and rhetorically, they're quite different. I've been very unable to find a lot of English language books on these. Trust me, I'm always on the lookout to spend money on books. So sure enough, I'll find one. In fact, my dear wife ended up spending, what, 120 pounds on a series of, I finally got actual lyrics to all of the Cantigas de Santa Maria today. It's an early birthday present for me. Once again, I'm not a scholar, nor am I a student, so I don't really have time to mess about in libraries. I typically do a lot of my buying online, whether it be Amazon or something else. So maybe I'm just not hitting the right places, but as far as I can tell, there's not much in English about these love cantigas. Now, the Cantigas de Amigo, it's kind of interesting. They're called Song of a Friend. The genre is very much like the Trouberites in Provençal, because they're written in a female voice. And we know that Trouberites were actually female troubadours. In northern France, the trouvères, they had songs in a woman's voice. And my good friend, Mistress Catla, and I go back and forth trying to argue whether or not there were, in fact, female trouvères. I'm probably going to give the nod to her because of the fact one of the books I bought her as a present one time basically says there are. So it'd be kind of undistinguished of me to say that they don't exist, but I don't think they exist. Anyway, the whole thing comes down to it is these are interesting because of the fact they're composed in the voice of a woman. And one of the other interesting things is that while there are certain extant copies of these forms of Cantiga de Amigo, one of the most recent, believe it or not, what they do is they recycle books. And so you take a book and you just paste pages over books. And I went to this concert in Santa Cruz on the coast with Mistress Catla, my good friend. And believe it or not, this entire concert was performed by performers who were using the music found when someone accidentally steamed pages off of a reused book. And so this is something that is kind of interesting to me, that there was this sense of songs in the female voice, songs of love. The one that we were seeing the concert on focused on the coastal town of Vigo. And it would be very womanly. It would be women talking to each other. Come with me to the coast and let us bathe in the gentle waves, and I will wait for my lover there. Or I will go and wait for my lover, and hopefully he will come, and hopefully I will not lose faith, for he will come upon the waves and his ship will come forward. It's, once again, a very interesting format when you consider the very male-dominated aspects of the Iberian Peninsula. Were they written by women? Not sure. Nothing really indicates that they weren't, but nothing indicates that they were. As such, that's one of those things that we can probably debate over a good port. Now, 7 songs of the Martin Codex, it's a mid-13th century manuscript. Most of this music is basically, it's always a girl, her mother, the girl's girlfriend, or the girl's boyfriend. And that seems to be the format. Stylistically, they're characterized by simple strophic forms with repetitions and a lot of parallels, and the use of a refrain. These cantigas constitute the largest body of female-voiced love lyric that has survived from ancient or medieval Europe, even more so than the trovaries of Provençal. There are 80 authors, all male, some better known being King Denis of Portugal, 52 songs in this genre. But once again, the scholarship effectively indicates that these Cantigas de Amigo were in fact written by men. The Cantiga de Amigo have been said to have had the characteristics in common with Mozarabic Kajarat, probably mispronouncing that, but there are some perhaps coincidences between that form of love song or love poetry with a female speaker on erotic themes. In short, males and females, whether they be Muslim or they be Christian, probably had a lot of the same feelings, all being human beings. The poetry of insult and mockery, Cantigas de Escarno et de Maldesir. These are the cantigas that have local roots. The latter 2 genres totaling around 900 texts. These are a substantial portion of Romance poetry. And when I say Romance, I don't mean romantic. I'm saying non-Latin. It's written in the vernacular. It could have been very much for local common people to enjoy, basically, watching the mocking. It's, once again, that concept of watching a soap opera. The Cantigas de Santa Maria are effectively one of the most important of the cantigas because of the effort that was utilized in maintaining them. Quite frankly, they were meant not only for religious purposes, but for political purposes. Once again, that we're talking about the idea that the Portuguese cantigas did not, come fully formed. There were influences throughout, whether it be Hebrew, the Mozarabic, the Arabic. It's all in dispute. Quite frankly, what we know is, though, that there was such a body of the cantigas that these troubadour performers effectively dominated with their great output of literature. Castilian literature provided models of court poetry and theater until Francisco de Sá de Miranda brought Renaissance forms from Italy in 1526. But until that time, the Castilian kind of took a back seat. Didn't kind of take a back seat, it did take a back seat. The closeness of Portugal's contacts with Spain, reinforced by dynastic marriages, often gave the court at Lisbon a predominantly Spanish atmosphere anyway. Once again, when you are so intermarried, there's no reason for one larger country to take over another. Although no literary documents belonging to the 12th century, 21st century of Portugal's history as a nation have survived, there's evidence of the existence of an indigenous popular oral history. So when Spanish influence and the Reconquista started to actually free Portugal, this indigenous oral poetry obviously came into the format of cantigas. A composition attributed to Alfonso X is actually the earliest extant parallelistic song, a brief repetitive lyrical poem marked by wistful sadness that runs throughout the Portuguese literature. Of the many poems that survive, most belong to the major categories of the love songs, both male and female, and the various other forms of songs of mockery and vilification. The body of lyrics shows the vitality of the school of poetry in Galician-Portuguese, an early dialect spoken in Galicia and north of Portugal. And remember, just because we start talking about Galicia and northern Portugal, they're not the same place. Galicia is effectively the province north of modern-day Portugal, and North Portugal is that portion of Portugal that was basically reclaimed from the Moors midway through the Reconquista. These lyrics were inspired clearly by Provençal songs of the troubadours, as well as anchored in the oral verses of popular oral tradition. The poetry reached its peak of creativity sometime between 1240 and 1280 under the patronage and with the direct participation of Alfonso X, although his father had begun to receive musicians and performers long before that. Under Alfonso X, the center of this literary activity shifted from Galicia and the north of Portugal to Toledo, now in Spain, or as Alfonso would have said, within his realm, because that was one of the states of his realm, where it remained until his death. There's a great deal of synergy, once again, not to belabor the point, between Portuguese poetry and Galician poetry, between the Portuguese and the Iberian Spanish. King Denis founded in 1290 the country's first university at Lisbon. He encouraged the translation into Portuguese of outstanding works from Castilian, Latin, and Arabic. The musicians in his court enjoyed the most highly cultivated practice of his national poetics. In all, there's about 2,000 poems by some 2,200 poets of this period preserved in these songbooks. And the songbooks are there on the screen, and I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce them. The first contains compositions that predate the death of Alfonso X. It was probably compiled in the late 13th century, however. The latter two songbooks included material from the 13th and 14th century. In short, Galician Portuguese was in style in terms of troubadour lyric poetry. And that's why Alfonso used it. He could have used Castilian, but instead of using Castilian, he chose to utilize a language that was already being utilized. Once again, going to modern 20th, 21st century cinema, you've got that famous debate in Amadeus, where they're trying to say, well, which is the appropriate language for opera? Italian, of course, but the Germans want it in German. But seriously, Italian is much more lyric, and as such, it is Mozart. Some of his best operas were written in Italian. La Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni, various other operas. Why? Because Italian worked. Why Galician Portuguese over Castilian? Because it worked. It was the style of the day. And as such, Alfonso bowed to the style of the day because he wanted something that was truly appropriate for his court. Now, there are 4 contemporary manuscripts of Alfonso's cantigas. Some manuscripts are amended with appendices, others appear to be expanded, some they're not complete. They kind of go back and forth. The most complete copy of the cantigas, numbered 1 through 427, with prologues assigned each cantiga, and that would have been the one that El Sabio kept for himself. The 4 manuscripts can be found in the following locations. If you go to Toledo, don't look for the Toledo manuscript there because it's now in the National Library of Spain in Madrid. Now, in terms of the 2 prettiest manuscripts, the Códice Rico and the Códice de los Músicos, those are in the Escorial Library in Spain. Interesting enough, there's an actual manuscript in Florence, in the Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale in Florence, Italy. Bad thing about that is it was probably rushed and a lot of it's missing. A lot of the substance is missing. Alfonso intended that his endeavor would result in a book featuring music, lyric poetry, and beautiful illuminations. In short, it was a multimedia extravaganza. Looking at the Códice Rico, or the Rich Codex, it's got the most interest because of the fact it's the prettiest. It has an extensive set of illuminations. Each song is accompanied by a page of 6 illustrations, which is a serialized representation of the song or story from top to bottom and right to left. To facilitate the visualized narrative, most miniatures are headed by a caption that summarizes, and there's sequential action, not unlike a graphic novel. Bet you didn't think we were going to get into DC land and Marvel, but seriously, it was a graphic novel. The religious nature of the Cantigas de Santa Maria did not prevent a lively representation of everyday life in the time of Alfonso. The illustrations in the Códice Rico show architectural design, the land and seascape of Alfonso's realm, complete with roads and familiar Marian shrines. In short, the illustrations give a glimpse of Alfonso's court and his realm in the actual pictures of the book. The Códice de los Músicos manuscript, as the name implies, simply features the illustrations of musicians playing the musical instruments of the day. In this particular case, it's not as weighted on depicting the realm of Alfonso, but rather the style of Alfonso, the pictures that we constantly see of the musicians sitting around and King Alfonso there on his throne. Those are basically taken from the Códice de los Músicos. While beautifully illustrated, the manuscript in Florence, as indicated, is incomplete and shows signs that the production of this tome was rushed. In short, probably somebody had a very short period of time. They zipped it together and went ahead and brought it back to Florence. The Toledo manuscript was Alfonso's own. Now, even though it's the king's own, it was actually the most simple, but because it was the king's own, it was also the most complete. And upon his death, it was bequeathed to the Cathedral of Toledo, where it was locked away. While it may appear that the tomes were not made available to common people, and this appears to be true, the manuscripts were intended for the nobility and the church, just as las siete partidas were written for justices, magistrates, clerks, nobles, and knights. So why was that important if he didn't care about his people? The answer is the people, who are the legs and the arms of the kingdom, are one thing. But in the body politic, it's important for the head to understand. And, most rebellions don't typically start with the people. They start with some Mesna lord or main lord who decides that, Alfonso's over here, I'm not going to worry about things. Guess what? Alfonso wants to show all of you that he is El Sabio, the wise. And even though he didn't ever defeat the Moors in a great battle, he did a very, very good job of using both Las Siete Partidas and the Cantigas de Santa Maria as a means of kind of maintaining his imprint upon his realm. Even though that these cantigas were basically meant for noblemen and churchmen, it's clear that this lyric poetry was effectively for everyone. How it got to the people was probably through recountings, through people basically reading it and then performing it. And once it's performed, just remember, Shakespeare never published his plays until somebody stole one. Somebody's in there in the back of the, in the back of the globe, writing out, Two Gentlemen of Verona. And when everything's written down, then somebody else performs it. And that's when Shakespeare goes ahead and prints it out and makes money that way. So, when we're looking at the settings of the cantigas are on the basically feature the shrines. They maintain a vision of the seas surrounding the Iberian realm, the churches, the convents, the roadways, palaces, its hovels, and its prison cells. This collection was a testament of faith, of Catholic faith, and maintained Catholic identity for his realm. Alfonso begins his work with an explanation of why he composed this book. He says, I learned for honor and praise of the Holy Virgin Mary, who is Mother of God, and in whom he places confidence and trust. Therefore, from her miracles, he set forth to compose songs and melodies, which are, quote, delightful to sing, each with their own narrative, as you can find herein. In short, Alfonso, as I indicated earlier, is effectively the Blessed Virgin Mary's troubadour. It is important to note that when Prince Alfonso was crowned King Alfonso X in 1252, he chose the Blessed Virgin Mary as his patroness and protectress. He was a plotter and a planner. He was determined to show his devotion to his patroness. The process ended in 1284. So you figure this is a man who spent 32 years of his reign effectively putting together two great books. Despite the fact that it's lyric poetry, the wording is straightforward and colloquial. Passages are marked with very natural dialogue. No iambic pentameter there. The miraculous is expressed in terms of the reality marked by faith, sin giving way to grace, death to life, vice to virtue. The full panorama of fallible men and women who, by virtue of their devotions to Saint Mary, are granted miracles, even if they do not, on their face, appear to deserve them. No matter if the recipient of the miracle is good or bad, the recipient is marked by a devotion to Saint Mary. The miracles affirm the essential truth that Saint Mary is merciful and forgiving. Unlike the elevated ladies noted in the troubadour poetry, who kind of look down upon the men vying for their attention, Mary is objectified as not only beautiful, but constantly merciful and nurturing. Once again, this is all formatted. It's like a Pater Nostra or Rosary. 9 cantigas illuminating a miracle, a 10th cantiga as a song of praise. This formula breaks down around 401, which is a petition that Alfonso directs to the Virgin. And then it goes on from there. In terms of that final number of cantigas, such a tally is always open to some debate, as there appears to be duplicate cantigas. However, while many speak in terms of over 400 cantigas, scholars project that there are 417 exempting duplicates. Ultimately, Alfonso did not win great victories on the battlefield, and he did not bring to pass the completion of the Reconquista. But he was noted as a sovereign of arts and letters who formulated a common law amongst divergent regions of his realm, in La Siete Partidas, and a king whose devotion to his patroness and protectress was unquestioned in the beauty of his encyclopedic work of music and illuminations. Okay, this is the fun part. You get to listen. And I'm going to play some, and some of these are comical, some of these are kind of sad. My favorite is the one about the pilgrim who could listen for it, the pilgrim who's going to Compostela and on the way ends up sleeping with a prostitute, doesn't seek confession, and is taken away by an evil spirit who basically cuts off his throat or cuts his throat and cuts off his penis and genitals. And the next thing you know, Santiago, St. James, tries to wrestle that person's soul back from the devil. And, oh, it doesn't work. The demon is too strong. And then who comes but Santa Maria, and she provides the wayward pilgrim with his body, his soul, his life, but not his penis because, well, he screwed up. Anyway, let's start the music.
Santa
Thank you very much. That is the presentation, and I appreciate everybody showing up, and hopefully you'll look into this. The music is gorgeous. It's very, very period. And if you even take the melodies and filk on these, contrafaction or contrafait, it'll give more of a period feel to your bardic. Anyway, thank you. And from California, good evening. Take care.
Thank you, Antonia and Anne. That was beautiful, and I will stop recording now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you very much.